Hello, good afternoon, good day, good evening, good morning, depending on where you are in the world listening to me right now. Thank you for having me here in your conference. I'm so excited to talk to you about sensory processing. So today we're going to say, how do I know if my child has sensory processing issues? So I am Erin Flynn. I am an OT and the education coordinator at the Spiral Foundation and a clinician at OTA, the Kumar Center in Newton, Massachusetts. And I'm very excited to talk about this topic with you. So today I want to just cover briefly in the time that I have, let's review what are the sensory systems, because there's some systems that you may not be familiar with. What is sensory integration and sensory processing? What are some signs of difficulties with sensory processing? And should you pursue therapy? So most of you learned in school the 5 sensory systems, and I'm going to introduce you to 8 today. So, and you're familiar with tactile, which is our largest sensory organ, because it covers our whole body. Olfactory, which is our most sensitive and protective sensory system, because it goes directly to the brain versus the others that have to go through the central nervous system, the spinal cord. Gustatory, taste. Auditory, hearing. Visual, vision. This one is interoception. So that is our internal triggers. What are we hungry? Do we need to go to the bathroom? What's our heart rate like? And then this one is proprioception. That's in your muscles and your joints. How much force do I need to put on an object? How is my body moving? How much do I need to lift my arm? How can I lift my arm to bring my drink to my mouth and not hit the straw into my eye? And then the vestibular sense. That is your body's GPS. It is located in the inner ear. It tells you how fast you're moving, what direction your head is moving in relation to gravity. Am I upside down? Am I right side up? So again, just to review, so we have the tactile system, the olfactory system, taste, hearing, vision, interoception, those internal states. And then I pulled out the movement senses of proprioceptive and vestibular, because that's how we move through space. We use those 2 systems. And then I've highlighted what we call the power senses. These 3 senses, the tactile, the proprioceptive, and the vestibular, are the foundation of building a body scheme and knowing where our body ends and the world begins, and how we're moving within that world. So this is how it is a hierarchy. And as I mentioned, the tactile, vestibular, and proprioceptive are those foundational systems, sensory systems, that then we use input into those systems to build the other systems, the olfactory, the visual, the auditory, the gustatory, then to build postural security, awareness of both sides of my body, motor planning, the ability to then eventually, ride a bike or walk. So these things build over time to cognition, right? And that's, and all of these things are happening in the background. We don't think about, most people do not think about their tactile and vestibular and proprioceptive systems. These skills are built upon and become automatic for most of us. But those with sensory processing disorder are having more challenges with those foundational skills. So what is sensory processing disorder? This was first identified by Dr. Jean Ayres, and she also developed sensory integration therapy in response to this. And she was doing her research in the late 60s, early 70s. So it is a problem in how individuals use sensory information for self-regulation and skill development. So I'm going to expand on those two items later. So SPD is often associated with other diagnoses: learning disabilities, attention deficit disorder, pervasive developmental disorder, autism spectrum, language disorders, anxiety disorders, depression, and behavioral disorders. So and sensory processing disorder in the general population is similar in numbers to the percentage in the research that the one, I apologize, I don't know which research study that stated that the SETBP1 population was about 23% had been diagnosed with SPD, and the general population, it's anywhere from 16 to 24%. So the numbers are similar. So I'm going to start with the sensory integration overview. And this gets back to that self-regulation and skill building. So we take in the sensory input through our sensory systems into our nervous system. And our nervous system does two things. We modulate that information and we discriminate that sensory information. I'm going to talk about modulation first. Modulation is how we learn to pay attention to what is important and we filter out what is not important. An example I use is that our bodies over time, throughout our lifetime, we acclimate to an environment and either find safety or not. So for instance, I love to use this example. I moved to the city from the suburbs about 7 years ago. Unbeknownst to me, I was on a fire truck route. So the very first few months that I was there, every time a fire truck would come by and I would hear the loud noises and the lights would flash in my room, I would bolt out of bed. Over time, my nervous system learned to filter that out. Now I don't even know if they go by. I don't hear them because the fire truck, my nervous system is telling me the fire truck isn't right outside my house. My smoke alarms aren't going off. And so my nervous system keeps me asleep. It's able to filter that noise out. So therefore, my arousal is changed now, right? Initially, my arousal was I went into high arousal. I paid attention to that noise and that visual. And, it would make me feel unsafe, right? There's a fire nearby. And so I respond, right? That's an example of modulation. But now my arousal level stays, I stay asleep. I have an appropriate arousal level for that situation. And an appropriate emotional and behavioral response in that situation. Individuals with modulation challenges do not, and we'll talk more about that in more detail. So the second thing we do is we discriminate that sensory information and we make meaning of the salient qualities of the input, right? We build skill. We learn to walk. We learn to crawl. We figure out how much pressure do I need to put on this cup and how do I bring it to my mouth so that I'm not poking myself with the straw in my eye. I bring it to my mouth and I take a sip, right? That's skill building. And then that happens in the background. It's not like I have to look at the cup, think about it. I do it automatically and bring it to my mouth with no problem at all. So we build skill, we build motor planning, we build coordination, and then that informs our postural control, our ocular motor control, and our listening and auditory skills. So let's dive deeper into sensory modulation. As I said, it's the ability to tune in or out sensory information to keep us safe and comfortable. This little guy is tuning out his twin brothers crying. He's like, oh, he's just crying again. Mom's going to come get him because I know that's what mom does. When I cry, mom comes and gets me and comes and gets him. So he's going to be okay. So I'm good. I'm happy. We adjust our internal state so that we stay in sync with the environmental demand. And as I said, it becomes automatic. Our brain should automatically adjust our state of mind to the environment that we're in. And what does that look like? So this is a slide of, this is a diagram of arousal states. And we call this optimal level of arousal, this window of optimal arousal. And that's where most of us live. And all through the day, all through the day, we go up and down, depending on these diamonds are sensory input. So line C is your typical person. The typical person, wakes up. I'm just going to use myself as an example. I have my coffee to wake up a little bit. Then I go take my shower. That's relaxing, right? Then I get in the car, and then I have to hurry and get all my lunch together and get all my things together, get in the car. And if you know anything about Boston and the drivers here, something will always happen as I'm driving to work to raise my arousal level, and I get honked at, or, but then I have a nice little walk into school, into my clinic. Maybe I have my coffee by then. I'm taking some sips of coffee, and I relax and take some deep breaths, right? Oh, and then I get a little email, and I got to start responding. But all of this, I'm staying within my window. And even in the afternoon, like I might start to get hungry here. I might start to get tired while I'm treating treating the kids. But I'm still staying in that optimal level. And I might go a little bit over, but then I know, okay, I need to get ready to see my next kid if I'm my next client. So I need to get myself back into my window. And then this is the bewitching hour that all parents know. The kids get home from school, they're hungry, they're tired, it's time for dinner, you're tired, and everyone's tired and hungry and has had a lot of input all day long. And, but then we get fed and we take a bath and we come back into our optimal level of arousal and we go to bed. So that's your typical person. And we all do this. We go up and down throughout our day, depending on the input that we get throughout our day. But some individuals have a harder time with that. And that's this individual, this B line. What happens here is that this person can take just so much sensory input throughout their day, but then they never quite get lower into that optimal window. They just stay under the surface. So in those individuals, it doesn't take much to put them over the edge. This is a student who might be working hard at school, and he might need a little bit more organizing input. And I'll talk about that later, in order to come deeper into their windows so they're not quite so close to the meltdown. The teacher then puts a demand on them that is just too much. And then they have, they might have a little tantrum. They might refuse to do something, right? And they might need a break. And they take that break, and then they're able to do the activity because they get some organizing input. But by the end of the day, when they get home, they're very quick to be frustrated. And then they go into what we call, this line here is shut down, sensory overload. So if you've heard of the autonomic nervous system response or the sympathetic nervous response of fight, flight, freeze. So this is the freeze. This is the freeze state up here. And some individuals live up in those high levels, or those high registry levels. And those individuals really would benefit from sensory integration therapy. And so would these. Okay. So what are some signs of sensory modulation challenges? So in the infant stage, we're looking at, actually through all stages, is going back to that, that window of tolerance. If individuals are really easy to for babies, easy to startle, oversensitive to movement, oversensitive to touch at all ages. The touch can stay with them. Clothing is uncomfortable. With toddlers, sometimes it's unpredictable movements and feet off the ground or being bumped. They have a big response to being bumped, or they refuse messy play. Though I will say some of my, what I'll hear is, oh, they're not tactilely sensitive because they can play with shaving cream and they can play with paint and they don't mind getting their hands messy. Oh, but they can't wear certain clothing. They're very picky about their clothing. That's a sign. If they're very picky about their socks and how clothes feel, that could be a sign of tactile sensitivity. If they are very sensitive to being on unstable surfaces, that could be a sign of movement sensitivity or car sickness. And then as they get older, they, are less, they don't want to participate in group situations because they might get inadvertently touched, or it might be too loud, or there might be too much visual stimulation. They might also seek out intense stimuli, like spinning might actually be organizing for them. I'll keep bringing up this word, and I'll talk more about it at the end. But and crashing into objects is a way of seeking out deep touch pressure, and that is organizing for most individuals. Think about how a massage feels to you. That's deep touch pressure. So sensory discrimination, so that's refining skills and the quality of each sensation. So taking in this swinging and be able to move comfortably on that swing while it's moving, to build a fort or build a big crash pad and by yourself and jump off into the pillows. So building that body awareness and that sense of position in space. Building motor coordination and the integration of the senses. So the vestibular, visual, and auditory systems happen to work very closely together, and their neuronal tracks are closely connected anatomically. So, for instance, riding a bike is a visual vestibular activity. Those systems and the auditory system, all three systems are helping you figure out spatial. Where am I in the room? If I close my eyes and I hear a noise, I can usually judge how far that noise is. The noise out in the hallway? Is the noise in the room with me? And then where am I? Where's my body, my vestibular system telling me where's my body in relation to that noise? So all three systems working together. So what are some signs of discrimination difficulties? Individuals who are having a hard time discriminating might need more of an input in order to wake up in order to engage and start processing that particular sensation. So they might seek a lot of movement. So they might constantly want to be held and walk with you, right? Or they don't like tummy time because they don't like their head being in that position. It doesn't feel comfortable. Toddlers are overly clumsy. One thing with discrimination is you really want to look at where your child is developmentally. Are they typical? Are they developing typically? Or are they being challenged? Are they delayed in that typical development? So a sign of a proprioceptive discrimination challenge is they break toys, or on their pencil, if they're writing really hard, that's a sign they're working really hard, or they're not adjusting the force on that writing instrument. The same thing that they're writing very lightly, again, might be that they just don't recognize how much force they need to put on that writing instrument in order to write out the words. or color in the picture. So if they seem weak or floppy, low tone is a sign of vestibular and proprioceptive challenges. If they're constantly on the move, that means their vestibular system needs more input in order for them to feel in their bodies. And then they can have difficulties with gross and fine motor activities. And I know this is something that's very common amongst the SETBP1 population. So definitely should be checked out, I believe. And then all of these together, the discrimination of many sensory systems lead to that body scheme and body awareness, and then the ability to motor plan your body. And that is also called praxis. And just to add, praxis is can also leads to executive functioning. And I know that's another issue that you all are facing. And so how could sensory integration be contributing to that? So when the systems aren't working well together, it is difficult to conceptual, organize, and sequence activities. Ideation is the idea of play, right? And then or following the sequence of activities that you need to do to get ready to go out the door in the morning. You know, I need to brush my teeth, I need to have breakfast, I need to get dressed, I need to get my backpack, and I need to get in the car. They could have issues with any one of those, or they just need constant reminders. Okay, or breaking down, an individual might need someone to break steps down. Okay, all right, go brush your teeth. All right, let's have breakfast. Okay, now we're gonna get dressed. Now we're gonna grab our backpack, and now we're gonna get in the car. Breaking the steps down for those. Or planning new and unfamiliar motor actions and problem solving as needed. These are the kids, you know, when we're typical individuals will problem solve as they try out a new novel activity. So signs of praxis difficulties. With the infant population, it's really about limited interaction. They're really quiet. You know, they're not interacting with toys. They have limited desire to engage with toys or or delayed gross motor development. And across all populations, difficulty adjusting to and transitioning between activities. And so with toddler, then you start seeing some of the emotional reactions, the frustration of, I can't do this, might interact aggressively with toys and peers because they get frustrated that they can't achieve an age-appropriate game. Or they need lots of repetition to master a skill, and they avoid new skills until they're absolutely comfortable with trying it. So preschool and beyond, difficulty organizing behavior. So those kids who can't follow a morning routine, or they really need things predictable, and they don't like unscheduled changes to their schedule. They follow a schedule, and transitions are really hard. These are the kids who, because at school, they might be doing a preferred activity and they're focused and they're great. And then they need to switch to a less preferred activity and they avoid that activity. And those are the kids who then end up getting labeled as a behavior issue when it's really just they're working hard to do the preferred activity, and it's going to be really hard to shift their brain to the new activity. So what we do with those individuals is we give them lots of prompts, lots of warnings. We may use lots of structure. Okay, we've got 5 minutes, then we're going to wrap things up and we're going to move on to, writing or whatever the next activity is. So here's where I'm going to talk about the organizing activities. So every human has sensory preferences, and every humans are different. And it's things we do throughout our day to stay in that just right place and to be able to stay focused and attended in an appropriate level of arousal for the activity. It's the natural routines that help us stay in the zone. So in that optimal level of arousal for the environment. And as I said, some of it's having our coffee. Some of it's taking a walk at lunchtime. Some people chew on their pencils. So what works, what a child needs to regulate their arousal and attention is different for everyone. Typically, what's needed for calm is low and slow. What is needed to arouse is fast and high. And what is needed to stay alert could be a combination of both of those, depending on the child. And as I said, one size does not fit all. Intensity, frequency, and duration of input is different for everyone. The type of input is different for everyone. Typically, deep touch pressure, as I mentioned, is calming. What we have here in this picture is a little tent. We call that womb space. Womb space is great because it takes away a lot of the sensory input, and you might have in that little tent, you might have some fidgets, you might have a weighted blanket for the deep touch pressure, you might have a low tone whistle, so because breath is very calming. You might have limited visual input if the child, visual input is too much. You might have some quiet music playing in there. If you want to wake them up, then you have louder music to wake them up, right? Or dance music. You might have these are homemade lava lamps, right? Watching a visual item like a lava lamp can be very calming for some kids and adults. Or oral motor input. Sucking from a straw is really good input for some individuals. Try it out. Everyone's different, and you can experiment with these things. So be sensory detectives with your kids. Look for signs and patterns of behaviors related to your child, the environment they're in, and the task that they're being asked to do. Because any one of those items can shift the behavior, because if the task is too hard, and then the environment is very hard for them to be in, is it too loud? Is it too busy visually? So taking those things into account and making small adjustments really impact the person. So that's where I would start. So thank you so much. If you want to learn more about sensory processing integration, please visit our website or contact us at the email below or the phone number, and we would be happy to help you find an a sensory integration therapist in your area. And we also have a number of free resources on our website, so please check them out. Thank you very much for having me. I look forward to answering your questions.
Welcome everyone to the SETBP1 Sensory Processing Disorder panel discussion. My name is Lindsey Noonan, the SETBP1 Society Secretary, and I'm so happy to be here with all of you today. I'm joined here with Erin Flynn, an occupational therapist, the education coordinator at the Spinal Foundation, and a clinician at the Kumar Center in Newton, Massachusetts. Thank you so much for your educational and interesting presentation. We welcome you all to ask questions in the Q&A box. Please remember to avoid including any personal information in your questions for your own privacy. We apologize in advance if we don't get to all your questions, but we're going to try and cover as much as possible. All right, with all that being said, let's start the Q&A discussion. I'm excited to hear from all of you. We have just a general question up first. So Erin, can a child also receive a sensory processing disorder if they have an intellectual disability or an autism spectrum disorder diagnosis?
Hi, Lindsey. Thanks so much for having me. And
And an answer to your question is yes. The simple answer. There, as I discussed some in the presentation, there are several comorbidities that we see sensory processing disorder or sensory processing challenges with individuals of all types, including intellectual disabilities and especially with autism spectrum disorders, often sensory processing challenges. And I'm going to just jump ahead too and say, one of the question that often comes up is how can a child be diagnosed with sensory processing disorder, and can OTs diagnose who is the one that diagnoses someone with sensory processing disorder? So an OT cannot diagnose. We're not allowed to diagnose. But we can evaluate for sensory processing challenges and identify those challenges. The official sensory processing disorder diagnosis actually does not exist in the Diagnostic Statistics Manual. It is something that the individuals like myself are trying to do more and more research so that we can. It has been proposed several times, and we're hoping that it will eventually be in the DSM as an official diagnosis.
Okay, thank you. Here's an interesting one from a parent. My 4-year-old son is biting his hands and arms frequently. It feels like it is a sensory issue versus a communication frustration issue. What suggestions do you have for me to help him to not bite his hands and arms?
So the answer to that question, as far as sensory versus communication, I'm going to say it's both. It's the way the child is communicating that they are having a hard time. And that, again, going back to my talking about sensory modulation, that ability to filter out the sensory information that is coming in around the individual, that they might be using that to communicate, I'm stressed, or this activity is too hard for me, or the demands of the environment are too much, it's too noisy, it's too many people. So trying to be that detective, as I talked about, of trying to figure out what is causing the biting of the hands and the arms. My suggestion is that in terms of how do I help not have him not bite, the suggestion is give him something to chew. That chewing is a very organizing activity. We see it in the clinic all the time. We have chewy, we use jewelry, if you know what that is. So, having something for the child to really, some resistive chewing, because that is really what they're seeking, that oral motor input. There's a lot of proprioceptive input that happens when we're chewing. And so it's a way of that individual might be seeking to calm their body down.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, we have another one. My child is very sensitive to touch. Do you have any suggestions to help him to be more comfortable with touch?
So if that is the case, I really would seek out an OT evaluation because it can be treated, and it should be evaluated and treated by an OT that is trained in sensory integration. That would be my top recommendation. Some things that you could do on your own too is do more tactile exploration, but you want to apply what we call deep touch pressure. So, using that deep touch versus light touch. Light touch is very alerting, and what some children who are tactilely sensitive, they feel that light touch as all the time, and they feel like it's, imagine what it feels like when a spider is going across your arm. We react to that in our, in our brainstem. It's a protective reaction, right? We try to get the spider off of us. For those individuals who are tactilely sensitive, I mean, it's like having that. It can be to that extreme. So, but you treat it by giving deep touch pressure to then calm the body, so that they're not feeling alerted by the touch. And then different tactile exploration, like we have bins of beans or rice or corn, and allowing, putting toys in there that they have to dig and grab out. So exploring different tactile experiences, but watching your child as they're experiencing it to see if they're okay with it. And, so start with something really big like beans, and see how that goes. And as they're comfortable with it, then you can work your way down to smaller and smaller things. Does that make sense?
I love that advice. Yeah. Is there a certain amount of time that you recommend we implement these strategies, like only do it for a minute or don't do it X amount of time per day? So that's a great question, because every human, we need different amounts of, so it's thinking about three things: intensity, duration, and frequency. So you brought up all three of those things. So how often should I be doing this? How long should I be doing this? And how intensely should I be doing this, right? So sort of one of the things that they have, research has discovered, is that proprioceptive input, or that heavy muscle work, pushing, pulling, carrying, or deep touch pressure, those inputs tend to last about 90 minutes in your body. So when we're designing a sensor, if you've heard the term sensory diet, when we're prescribing a sensory diet, it's every 90 minutes to 2 hours. And that's because that's how long that calming input will last in the body. Now, vestibular input is different. It can last with you for up to 8 hours. So, so really, again, reading your child's reaction, that will tell you how long and how intensely to do it. And you sort of have to, and working with an occupational therapist who can help you recognize those pieces. Okay, perfect. Thank you so much. Well, thank you everyone for joining this Q&A session. We hope you learned some helpful tips and valuable information about sensory processing disorder from Erin's presentation. Thank you to Erin for sharing your expertise and participating in this Q&A. Next up is Dr. Carl Ernst's presentation about cell models for SETBP1 haploinsufficiency disorder. Please click into that session on the left-hand side of the website to join this upcoming presentation.